Thank you so much. Thank you. It's an incredible honor to be here, and thank you to everybody that's arranged the talks, and Ambassador Gill, congratulations on this award. I'm a bit of an outsider to this field, so I just want to let you know that I might come at this from a bit of a different perspective because I'm a sociologist. I'm not a technologist per se. But I think a lot about technology, and I think about how people use technology in bad ways, right? And so not just, oh, are we going to get more malware? I'm thinking about how are other global stakeholders going to be using this technology to create situations of competition, amplify divisions, push polarization, so that they can leverage essentially technology in order to disrupt society, disrupt governance. And as I was listening and thinking about some of the work that I've done in the past on white supremacist use of DNA ancestry tests, I did this study when I was at UCLA's Institute for Society and Genetics, and not a lot of people thought, well, you know, DNA ancestry tests, these are great tools. These are, you know, they teach you about your lineage. But what white supremacists were doing productively with that tool was creating boundaries. They were talking about, you know, revisioning the one drop rule. They were talking about how they were going to reconcile this push for diversity within genomics with their own ideas of what it meant to be white, and how they were going to use that science in order to create more division. And as I think about how the Human Genome Project came together and then was subsequently critiqued, much of the critique of the Human Genome Project was that it left behind stakeholders, particularly indigenous people, and then LGBTQ people, in this race to get at this data. And so in some ways, indigenous communities had to rise up and say nothing about us without us, right? And it was a big critique of the Human Genome Project because they were sourcing data and blood samples and DNA samples from indigenous communities without really making any promises about what to give back. And from queer people and trans people, they were sourcing DNA to try to find this elusive gay gene or this trans gene. And of course, it didn't really work. And we see and we're confronted by something similar with facial recognition technology right now, where facial recognition technology is saying, well, we can find people's emotional states. Maybe we can find a gay face. Maybe we can find partisan faces. Maybe we can reveal something about someone's political interests by analyzing their faces. And worse, we can identify criminal faces. So it's this reimmersion of phrenology in some ways. And when it comes to misinformation and disinformation, we classically talk about AI as something that exacerbates or amplifies differences, already pre-existing differences. It speeds up the news, it accelerates scale, so that if you're using a botnet or you're manipulating algorithms, you're able to get your disinformation out to larger publics very quickly. We don't think about the kind of media manipulation and disinformation that would be enabled by AI. The creation of disinformation about vulnerable and marginalized populations by creating this quasi-scientific knowledge about, you know, gay faces or criminal faces, for instance. And so when we do our research on media manipulation and disinformation, of course, we're looking at the touch points of hate, harassment, and incitement that tend to be the products of disinformation campaigns. But we also have to really care about how the technology is being designed, how the technology is being deployed, and of course, who has access to that technology, and then who is able to govern it. And I've been thinking a lot about this notion of Web3, because I think what we're moving from is the problem of user-generated content to a new problem of AI-generated content. I just want to wrap up on a couple major points about deepfakes, cheapfakes, and these new emerging technologies like DALL-E, GPT-3, as well as Galactica, which was Meta's version of a large language model that was recalled last week. So if we're thinking about AI that subverts society, subverts our culture, undermines our politics, makes it more difficult for us to resolve our wedge issues, then deepfakes, which are essentially AI-generated images or video or audio that take someone's likeness and make it seem as if they have said something. Most applications of deepfakes right now are pornography. And it's not pornography just in the sense of, oh, can I take, some Hollywood starlet's likeness and create a simulated scene and then make money off of it. It's also used in blackmail of people. And there's been some legislation looking at deepfakes in that way. We also have cheap fakes, which is like just the use of editing tools, no AI involved, but quickly speeding up a video, slowing down a video, changing the context of a video. This is something that Russia does a lot in the context of trying to get world world leaders to look into what they claim are human rights abuses by Ukrainian forces. And so these deepfakes and cheapfakes are already out there, primarily being used in ways that are amplifying already existing divisions. But I think that there's something really important that we need to understand about this next generation of read fakes, or these large language models, which people within these companies like Google have been fired for investigating. I'm thinking here about the work of the Distributed AI Research Institute, led by Timnit Gerbeau, as well as some of the work of Joy Ballanwini, who has been at MIT for some time talking about these large language models. Galactica was recently released by Meta, and within a few days it was pulled back because it was being used to generate fake scientific papers. And the idea was that a few scholars who know a lot about a certain issue just put in prompts into the Galactica language model and then saw what was spit back from this language model based on stuff they already know about. And the big critique was these sound like scientific papers and they're not. And some of the results are biased because we know what's built into the language model is a product of our culture. And so Meta decided to take the large language model off the net. DALL-E 2 has been criticized for making images and in some instances stealing the copyright or elements of copyright from other artists in order to create these AI generated images. Where that's most apparent is when you look up something like ketchup and everything looks like a bottle of Heinz, right? And so you see that the branding and whatnot is already baked into the technology itself. It can't imagine ketchup without Heinz, right? So where do we go if the way this is headed are towards more computer-generated or AI-generated content in Web3? Is that we have to think about this practically, and we have to think about it from the standpoint, I believe, of governance. And we had talked a little bit earlier about truth. Truth is a human process, right? The problem with Galactica is it doesn't know what's true. There's no algorithm that knows what's true. Truth is a process that we get to through verification, methodology. So you can't just insist on truth from these systems. Even though they are called intelligent, they're in many respects not capable of telling the difference between what is true and false. And it reminds me of the way in which X-rays were accepted in medical practice. So not many people think about the history of the X-ray, but in legal cases, the problem is that you would go to work, you'd break a bone, and then you'd have no way to say my bone is really broken. So the X-ray system was this really unique way in which you could look inside the body. But legal experts and judges asked, well, is this really seeing inside the body? How do we know this? And how can we then get experts to come and testify that this is a picture of inside the body and this bone break isn't just a remnant of the production process? So we had to create an entire expert system that worked around the technology, that worked with our truth-telling institutions. We need more people in this phase of looking at AI that can talk to journalists, that can talk to technologists, that can take that knowledge and repackage it and represent it so that governments can understand the true risks. And unfortunately, what I've learned being at the Kennedy School for a little while now, and is that there's no governance without transparency and accountability. It's just not possible. And there's no transparency and accountability without independence in research and the ability to audit these systems. And as a researcher, I have been very proud of the fact that I've been able to do all of my research on media manipulation, misinformation, without a dime from any of these companies and without any data proprietarily given to me as a researcher, because that independence is the most important thing I have when it comes time to stand. I've learned this and I have tested my own knowledge and we have devised our own methods, and we can say with confidence that we know what we collected and what we know is true. And so I think that one of the ways to get towards this auditing and governance that we are going to need is to think more about adversarial methods, really about what is it going to take to get students to try to break these systems, to be able to learn from these large language models. And then secondly, we're going to need to bring in abusability studies, not just usability studies. We're really going to have momentum that goes beyond ethics, because ethics are what you do when you don't have a policy. It's sort of like, and it's very individually tailored. But if we have a study and a method for understanding abusability in these systems, we will be able to move forward, I believe, together towards a public interest internet. Thank you.